Yes, good morning. I'm Vesa-Pekka Herva. I'm professor of archaeology, which kind of means that I'm interested in things. And what I'm talking about today is more about the setting than the substance. But let's see. So this is the starting point. Antonio Gramsci, who was a politician and writer, Italian, and so he wrote in the 1930s, "The old world is dying and the new world struggles to be born. Now is the time of monsters." And monsters, in a way, is my take on. So, like I said, I'm not talking like about psychedelics so much in the strict sense, but this is more like inspired by psychedelics and psychedelic experiences in an attempt to make sense of how we encounter the world, especially urban environments, and what kind of a world are we actually encountering. So basically, I'm kind of playing with a little bit with altered states of consciousness and shamanism, but in a fairly sort of a broad and kind of a loose sense. So the whole point of this talk is more about, it is about idea, it is more about perspective, it is not the case, it is not about substances as such. Which also means that I'm going to take you a little sort of trip, which has many sort of parts to it, and we are not going to linger in any sort of bit for very long, because the whole point here is, as I see it, is how we kind of connect different kinds of things and phenomena. And a little bit more strictly, or kind of narrowing down a bit, I'm interested in weird stuff and weirding. And this is something that several authors and researchers have recognized over the last, well, say over the 2000s, where the Anthropocene world where we live in is weird in many ways. I mean, there are lots of things happening in technology, in economy, and whatnot. These kind of weird things that based on our kind of everyday experience of the world, we just can't really make very much sense of. Which, to my mind, and to many others as well, suggest that we need to look at things that are somehow sort of beyond the rational, and also appreciate the significance of those strange and weird things that we are surrounded by. So all kinds of unknown things and monstrous things, at least in a theoretical sense. And this is also the take of my talk as well. So there is David Lynch, and we will return to him in the end. But just very briefly, what is this weirding about? It is a kind of an approach employed nowadays in several different fields of study. With the basic idea is that we use this weird fiction. Some examples are shown here. To think with or kind of try to make sense some of the weirder and stranger and more monstrous sort of dimensions of the world where we live in. So basically, we are trying to sort of think differently and see differently. And this is my take here. I'll try to look at the experience of urban space from a little bit sort of different angle than we probably usually do. So weirding is basically about kind of appreciating that there are this kind of non-linear space-time relations to our lived world, and those are very important as well. And this kind of directly links to psychedelics and all the states of consciousness as well. So we are trying to weird the world, and on the other hand, consider a little bit how do we know this kind of a weird world. And the labyrinth is a kind of a heuristic tool for doing some of this thinking. We are not going to details here as in any other sort of thing that I have, but basically the labyrinth is known as this kind of a powerful or potentially powerful device for generating altered states of consciousness and this kind of spiritual experiences, and spirituality in a very sort of broad sense we can understand as a way of becoming aware of ourselves and the world from new angles and from new perspectives. So again, there is a potential connection, at least here, to psychedelic experiences. But what I think is very important, and which also ties to the labyrinth, is that when we are talking about this kind of mystical experiences, altered states of consciousness, and so on, it is not just some kind of an inner phenomenon, but it is somehow tied to the actual experience of the material world around us, and that kind of scaffolding is something that I'm interested in. So what the labyrinth, for instance, does effectively is that it disorients people, and this disorientation is engaging with those aspects of reality that we don't necessarily we are not necessarily aware of in our ordinary everyday life. So this creates some kind of a magical consciousness, which is a way of engaging, seeing and engaging the world under the surface of the world as it kind of presents itself to us in this kind of ordinary everyday settings. And again, it is interesting that there is a monster in the labyrinth, which we will continue by moving to the cities now. The lovely doggy here is representing monster. I mean, for obvious reasons, I guess. But before going to the contemporary cities as such, just to give a bit more sort of maybe concrete or delimited case, this is the Palace of Knossos on Crete. It is a Bronze Age palace, so about 3,500 years old. And as these images give an idea, at least, of is that it's very complex. It's very kind of a strange place, and it doesn't really make much this kind of practical sense. That 150 years after the study of this culture started and these remains, we still don't quite know what these so-called palaces were actually built for. But they are very sort of strange experiential places and spaces. They are really sort of clearly designed to be circulated, that you are sent to kind of wander in these complexes in a way sort of inwards and downwards of these spaces that you see here. They very much have all kinds of uncertain boundaries. What is inside? What is outside? What's really happening in this space? There are lots of different kinds of openings. There is like obscure inside-outside relations. Fragmented views and all sorts of like confusing or disorienting features. So the whole space, as I see it, is distinctively this kind of porous and confusing, disorienting, and this, in my way of thinking, at least, is one way of trying to sort of show the people who experience this space, like the worlds or dimensions of the world sort of beneath the immediately perceived material environment. And again, this is something that ties to study of psychedelics. David Luke, for instance, has been like thinking about what psychedelic experiences might tell, not only about the structure of our mind and the way the mind works, but maybe also reveal something about the so-called external world out there. So worlds that are somehow sort of beneath the surface of the world as we ordinarily perceive it. So cities, like contemporary cities, historical cities, they are not formally the same kind of places as labyrinths, like classical labyrinths. They are not even like exactly similar to this kind of Bronze Age palatial spaces, but they have many similarities nonetheless. So cities are very complex, they are very rich, they are very sort of layered places. And the way I see it is that cities as places, as experience places, promote this kind of a sense of there being more in the world, sort of beneath the surfaces again. We don't quite know what exactly there is, but what we kind of have this sense that there is more. So cities very much or very distinctively kind of expand beyond the readily perceivable, but it also raises the question, so what is there? What else is there? How much is there? So in a way, cities are entangled with this sense of mystery and uncertainty. And this is something that we don't think about in our ordinary everyday life, of course, at least not all the time. But this is something that is clearly in some kind of cultural, I don't know, unconscious or subconscious or something like that, which is very clearly reflected in fiction. We can think of urban fantasy, urban horror, and so on, which play with these ideas that there are this kind of magical dimensions or kind of hidden dimensions to cities, and there are often monsters at the heart of cities as well. So, like connections to the idea of the labyrinth and the monsters, which is of interest to us here. So the next part of this this walk or flight is to look at some very sort of concrete cases where there is some kind of an experience or play with this kind of hidden, invisible worlds beneath the surface. Whether or not we think about things in those very terms when we are actually kind of engaging or experiencing these things. But rave parties, which is something that was a big thing in the 1980s, 1990s, is a fairly sort of obvious example of this kind of a setting where altered states of consciousness and some kind of spiritual experiences are happening in a seemingly very sort of mundane setting. This is something that Ken MacLeod has studied. I'm just referring to one article of his. But he was basically trying to sort of think about rave parties in terms of shamanism, how shamans are this kind of like priests among the sort of the wildly dancing crowds. And this often also involves in taking psychedelic substances. So in many senses, these rave parties were like shamanistic events, which kind of funnily ties back to the Minoan culture of Crete and the Palace of Knossos that I was mentioning earlier, where there is also there has been a lot of research and talk about the sort of the dance imagery that we have in Minoan art, which seems to be this kind of ecstatic in character, which again some people, myself included, like to think that this is really connected to this kind of shamanistic dimensions of Minoan culture, even though this has been traditionally downplayed a lot, because it was thought that this kind of civilization, its religion is focused on deities like actual gods and goddesses, but it looks like this kind of shamanistic dimension was much more important to Minoan spirituality, just like it is to contemporary sort of being in the world and encountering in the world, even though rave parties is just this kind of like bit extreme or very clear example of that. Coast walks could be seen as another example where this kind of altered state of mind and altered states of consciousness and altered perception comes to play. These ideas are coming mainly from Julian Holloway, who wrote about infrastructures of enchantment in connection with ghost walks as this kind of organized, casual sort of engagements with urban environment. But the idea here is that the very setting, in many different ways, the sort of the period or the guides with period clothing, and then darkness of old cities, and this kind of sense of mystery that was intentionally tapped on, or is intentionally tapped on this kind of walks, is again one way of changing the way people perceive and relate to the environment. the way we experience the environment in ghost walks is not necessarily this kind of spiritual experience in a traditional sense, but it does something to our mind. It does change the way people see and relate and engage with their environment. And Holloway, for instance, was in the opinion that that these walks are designed to create this kind of sense of there being something more beneath the sort of the immediately perceived material environment. Urban exploration as this kind of a hobby is yet another example of the kind of realign ourselves in relation to the world. Distinctively sort of venture into places that are beyond the ordinary everyday environment, to places that we are not really sort of supposed to go to. And when we go to abandoned industrial complexes and places like that, as pictured here, we really encounter this kind of otherworldly places which are very sort of different and kind of confusing compared to this kind of very sort of manicured, ordinary urban environments. So again, we are encountering a kind of a world that is ordinarily hidden from us and encountering sort of the unfamiliar with all kinds of kind of existentialist implications to it. And what makes industrial places and industrial ruins interesting in this respect is that the contemporary world, of course, is very much built on industrial production, and yet most of us are quite sort of distanced from industries, sort of the actual first-hand encounters with industries. So in a way, I think, and kind of taking the weirding perspective into account here, these kind of places and venturing in this kind of places could be related to the zones that we find in the film Stalker and in many other works of fiction like Jeff Vandermeer's Annihilation and so on. So strange places, strange experiences, strange things encountered in these places. Again, this doesn't need to be like somehow sort of distinctively altered states of consciousness type of a experience, but it's something like that. It is something different from our ordinary, everyday sort of sense of the world. And lastly, underground railways. This is a very sort of mundane, kind of weird domain. In capital cities, it's very everyday thing to take the underground train and travel it. But especially if we look at this in a historical perspective and the construction of the London Tube, for instance, we really sort of encounter these concerns of existentialist horror almost involved in venturing into this dark and unknown and dangerous underground world, which is actually also still the case with mining work, for instance. And there is a whole lot of richness of folklore from the 19th century to the present associated with underground trains. And again, of course, also a lot of fantasy and horror fiction that is playing with these ideas of the unknown and the extraordinary and monstrous that is somehow lying underneath the surface and kind of where people come to contact it in the context of underground trains, for instance. So to cap things up, what I'm basically just trying to suggest here is that the lived world, as we actually sort of experience is much more like this kind of a David Lynch film experience than we are like ordinarily aware of. Again, many of these things that they happen without our really sort of kind of consciously knowing or recognizing that, but nonetheless they are there. And we are really sort of moving between different kinds of worlds which are connected to particular types of environments but also like aligned with varying kind of altered states of mind in many different senses. And many of those veils or curtains that separate those different sort of worlds are something that we don't really necessarily recognize ordinarily. But I guess this is really all I had in mind for today. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really exciting. So, do you have any questions or comments?
Thanks. That made me want to roam the streets of Turku with looking for monsters. I kind of understand the connection, immediate connection between urban environments and the monster perspective. But I was wondering, are there any examples of urban environments and kind of the opposite side of entities, so benign entities, the guardian spirits or the angels or something like that? How come it's sort of like immediately you go for the monsters? And not that they would be in the subway line, they would be like helpful guardian spirits and who guide you through the difficulties of life.
It's a very good question. I think that when it comes to okay, this is a bit complex now, but let's say underground railways, for instance. So this is very kind of distinctively something that is a subterranean thing. And if we look at human sort of perceptions and engagement with the subterranean, not over the centuries, but over the millennia, actually, we really find this kind of very kind of dualistic disposition towards the subterranean. Because again, I think mining is a very sort of good example, because mines, ore bodies, they really are like bringing in wealth and richness or riches and stuff like that. So from that point of view, it is something benign. It's something good. But simultaneously, those say ore bodies, for instance, they are controlled by spirits who are not necessarily malevolent, but they have this kind of very sort of ambivalent and ambiguous kind of nature. So that they might be, kind of working for you, but they might be also against you. And I guess this is actually something that I could have made clearer when talking about monsters, because monsters in this kind of theoretical construction doesn't really only mean some kind of like demonic entities, but it really means entities who are kind of transcending and transgressing all kinds of boundaries, who are very distinctively ambivalent, ambiguous, kind of here and there. Their limits are, or kind of boundaries are uncertain, and so on. So this is the sort of the type of monster that I was talking about. But I guess modernity especially has very sort of complicated relations with this kind of this kind of monstrous sort of non-human entities, which kind of aligns them with evil and malevolent and things like that quite naturally. I don't know. This is just a little bit like trying to go here and there, but some thoughts anyway.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I have a rather straightforward question. Could you more clearly define how you conceptualize a world? What does a world mean to you? Because you seem to have focused on weirdness or weird experiences as some sort of revelation of other worlds, rather than perhaps a unusual perspective of what is already present. So what do you mean by a world?
Yeah, well, this is an easy question, obviously. When I'm talking about the world, it's first of all, I don't really think that there is only like one world, but more like the world is composed of many different worlds, or whatever you sort of want to call them, many different aspects or layers or dimensions or something like that. And I guess what I'm basically just trying to say, or what I'm sort of really interested in, is those sort of dimensions or aspects of reality that are beyond what we in sort of modern context consider real and this kind of like immediately perceivable and present. I don't really know if this answers your questions at all, but it's I'm not quite questioned.
Thanks. Yeah, we often connect the countryside and with all things good and promoting well-being and peaceful and so on, and cities with everything bad and sickness and so on. If we think about this labyrinthine aspect, or this aspect of altering consciousness and being weird and so on, is that a good thing in our cities? Should we build more labyrinths in our cities and make them more exciting and consciousness altering and so on? Or is that actually what's making cities so terrible and sickness inducing?
It's a lovely question. I don't really think that it is a good or bad thing that these labyrinths and the sort of the way the cities are. What I really kind of, I like primarily think that cities are just this kind of like very sort of dense and condensed, like concentrations of the elements of whatever you call it, world or reality, that is also there, outside the cities. But the cities are just very distinctively this kind of rich and layered sort of entities. And this is also something, I guess, which makes them disturbing, because they are huge and they are undefined and whatnot. So, but the same sort of dimensions of reality, I think, are existing also outside cities. It is just a little bit sort of different. It's less dense in a way. But when it comes to city planning, yes, I would love to have more and more like this kind of mystery and layeredness and the labyrinthiness to cities. If you're just asking my opinion about that matter.
Yes, thank you for a great talk, and I love the reference to the Anubis Gate and breaking the time continuum as well. My question is, do you in your work make any connections to core shamanic principles about the middle world and how it is potentially populated by all sorts of spirits, as opposed to the upper and the lower worlds, where are considered safer or safe places despite the forms that entities take?
Sorry, upper world, you said?
Yeah, so the core shamanic principles of the middle world that is populate our world, that is populated by all sorts of entities, benign and malign as well. So I was wondering if you make any connections to that in your work. Yes,
this is just what I was talking about today is more like just a little sort of slice of the like bigger project that is my career in doing research, where I've been really sort of studying the interaction and engagement between all kinds of like human and non-human beings, like this kind of netherworld or underworld and whatnot. It's just kind of naturally features from my point of view, I guess, in the sense that as an archaeologist, I'm a little bit sort of maybe drawn, but kind of my philosophy basically is that this is not the which has non-human entities that we go inhabit the world with. So I happily embrace the sort of the richness of that non-human sort of presence in all different forms.
So, thank you.